Thanks so much. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this community workshop on the Los Angeles County Draft 2045 Climate Action Plan. Next slide. I would like to start with a round of introductions of the project team members with us today and whom you will be engaging with later on in the workshop. Next slide. I will start with county staff. My name is Tui Hua and I am the project manager. I have with me Alejandrina Baldwin, Iris Chi, Cameron Robertson, and Caroline Chen. Part of the project team, we have expert consultants with us. Brian Schuster, the project manager from ESA, as well as Jeff Caton and Brianna Sewell, also with ESA. Next, I have Jessica Padilla-Bowen and Catherine Padilla, both from Catherine Padilla and Associates. And finally, Heather Rosenberg from ARIP. We're all happy to be here to engage in a dialogue with you on this very important project. Next slide. Before we begin, I have a couple of logistics disclaimers. First, this workshop is being recorded. Your questions and comments throughout today's workshop will help us provide clarifying information for the project. The recorded presentation will be uploaded to the project website for future viewing. Second, your video and microphone have been disabled for the presentation portion of the workshop, but will be later enabled for the interactive component. For today's agenda, we will first start with a presentation on the Draft 2045 Climate Action Plan, which will last about 20 minutes. Again, your microphone will be muted during the presentation. If you have any clarifying questions about the information being presented, please enter your question into the chat and we will respond to those questions during the presentation. The presentation will be followed by the interactive component consisting of breakout groups where your microphone can be unmuted for you to have a dialogue with your group. I ask that you hold your discussion comments for the breakout group session. Finally, we will have a report out to share the discussion from each breakout group and end with closing remarks. With that, I will hand it over to Brian for the presentation.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us today, your Wednesday afternoon. I'm gonna go through a couple of slides and then we'll jump into our breakout groups, and the chat feature is open even though you are muted. So why are we here? First of all, the 2045 Climate Action Plan is the unincorporated county's path to carbon neutrality by 2045, which is our long-term aspirational goal. And this all stems back to the joining the Paris Agreement, which the Board of Supervisors essentially ratified in 2016. The CAP is also part of the general plan. The air quality element requires the development of a climate action plan, and this is the latest iteration of that plan. And then finally, we're here to present to you how we change the CAP based on all of the fantastic feedback that you and many other groups provided on the draft CAP back in 2020. Next slide. Here's just a summary of some of the public comments we received through that process. We received many comments, and thank you so much if you participated in that process. We received comments on concerns about utility scale renewable energy and the effects that might have on rural communities, comments regarding affordability of upgrades to all electric appliances, electrical panels, REACH code, net zero REACH code requirements for both new and existing development, building performance standards for existing development, EV charging, accessibility for both the public right-of-way and private development, and especially for multifamily. The electrification of vehicles, balance between jobs and housing, and other land use related planning practices, active transportation and mobility options like walking and biking. Next slide. Comments also came in about making sure that we're fully comprehensive in our GHG accounting and including GHG emissions from water and waste, a consideration of nature-based solutions in addition to traditional infrastructure, decentralized organic waste composting in addition to centralized systems, making sure that the cap accounts for specific, identifiable, and committable funding sources, and then partnerships with various organizations, school districts, leaders, agencies, and project developers. Next slide. This is our first poll question. Have you had any involvement with the CAP update to this point? Is that going to pop up? So this could be, did you participate in the original round of outreach? Did you submit comments on the CAP? Did you participate in the survey that we released a few months back? Any type of previous participation? All right, looks like we have 18 responses so far. Cool, so most people, it looks like our first time participants. Welcome, thank you for joining. And about 20% of folks previously participated in one way or another. Great. Do I click share now, the results? Is that me? Okay, there we go. Is it working? Okay, I think we're good. We can go on to the next slide now. All right, where are we now? So after this outreach process a few years back, we worked with various county departments and staff within the departments to contribute to the update. We prepared a revised draft CAP in April based on public comments, department input, new information, a new GHG inventory and forecast, and a bunch of other information. We're also preparing a CEQA review on the CAP. The draft EIR is underway and will be available later this month, so that'll be published very soon. And we'll be accepting public comments on the draft CAP through July 8th, which is about 2 months. So two-ish months from now, you have an opportunity to submit your comments on the CAP, and you will also have the opportunity to submit comments on the draft EIR separately. Next slide. Well, the purpose of this meeting, Thuy mentioned this already pretty much at a high level, but basically we're here to introduce the CAP and what it includes. We want to hear from you, of course, which is why you're all here. We're fine-tuning the CAP. We're seeking your input on actions for implementation, funding, timelines, things we might have missed. And finally, you have an opportunity to ask questions of staff and consultants. Next slide. So what does the CAP include? It includes community inventory, GHG inventory. So this is for the unincorporated county only. It does not include the incorporated cities. This is the unincorporated county area. The emissions inventory for the years 2015 and 2018. 2015 is our baseline year for target setting, and 2018 is the most recent complete inventory, sort of a snapshot moving forward. There's a future emissions forecast for 2030, 2035, and 2045. The CAP includes targets. So there's a 2030 and 2035 interim targets, specific non-zero targets, and then the aspirational carbon neutrality goal by 2045. To get to those targets, the CAP has a suite of strategies, measures, and actions, and there's sort of the organization of measures in that way. So we have overall sectors like energy, and then we have strategies, 10 strategies, 25 measures within those 10 strategies, and over 90 implementing actions for the measures themselves. And the cap also includes implementation plans, so implementation and monitoring, the lead department for each measure and action, funding sources, tracking metrics, timelines, and also a consistency review checklist for new development as part of the CEQA process that will be used for new development to streamline their greenhouse gas impacts analysis. Next slide. Here's a snapshot of the greenhouse gas inventory for the unincorporated county. The left bar chart shows a comparison by sector between 2015 and 2018. Now the sectors are across the bottom and the scale of emissions is on the y-axis. And the chart on the right shows a breakdown of the 2018 GHG emissions for the county. It's about 5 million metric tons. Half of that is transportation, and a third is stationary energy, building energy, residential, non-residential energy. So mostly energy and transportation, 9% waste, 5% industrial, and 1% ag and forestry. Next slide. The targets of the 2045 cap are shown here, and with a comparison to the statewide California targets for the various future years. So the 2045 cap has a target of 40% below 2015 levels by 2030 and 50% below 2015 levels by 2035, as compared to the AB 32, SB 32 target of 40% below 1990 emissions levels by 2030. The state doesn't have a 2035 target, but the state does have a carbon neutral target by 2045, and the cap also has a goal of carbon neutrality for the same year. Next slide. Okay, second poll question. Did you have a chance to review the draft cap before this workshop? This doesn't mean did you read the whole thing? Just do you have a chance to look at it, browse around, see what's in there? All right, we're still going. Okay. Oh, okay, we're sharing. So yeah, 20% of folks had a chance and 80% did not. So wonderful. We're here to answer your questions and help walk you through it as we go in our breakout groups. Okie doke. Next slide. Strategies. So here's a list of our 10 strategies. There are 5 overall sectors of emissions: transportation, energy supply, building energy and water, waste, and agriculture, forestry, and other land use, or AFLU. The 10 strategies which fall under these sectors are decarbonize the energy supply, which is a focus on the grid. Transportation, we have increased densities and diversity of land uses near transit, reduce single occupancy vehicle trips, and low carbon transportation. For building energy, we have decarbonized buildings, improve efficiency of existing building energy use, conserve water. On waste, our strategy is minimize waste and recover energy and materials from the waste stream. And for AFLU, we have conserve forests and working lands, and sequester carbon and implement sustainable agriculture. Those are our 10 strategies. Next slide.
Brian, before we move on to the additional details, we did get a couple of questions that I wanted to share with the rest of the group.
Great.
The first is we have a question on how large is the population in unincorporated areas of the county. And we have a little over 1 million people in the unincorporated areas. It's about 1.034 million. And secondly, we do have a question about the GHGs. Are the GHGs broken into type of GHG? For instance, waste possibly has a larger methane component. And do we prioritize by GHG potency?
Yeah, the greenhouse gas emissions primarily include carbon dioxide, methane, and N2O. There's also some HFCs and PFCs in the industrial sector. Waste is almost entirely methane, landfill methane. And the emission reductions measures address all of those GHGs. So the waste measures look at reduction in methane, transportation measures look at reductions in all GHG because they're all byproducts of combustion, except for the fluorocarbons. And everything is equated to carbon dioxide equivalent. So, you know, reduction of 1 ton of methane gets us 25 tons of CO2 about. So, yeah.
Great.
Okay, so here's a break.
For now.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you. Keep them coming. So here's a breakdown of the emissions reduction potential by sector, overall sector. So we have the most of the reductions here, 1.5 million metric tons of reductions by 2030. We're focusing on 2030 because that's our nearest term target. 45% of those are from transportation, and a third are from energy supply. We have the remaining 14% from building energy, 7% from waste, and 1% from ag and forestry. All right, next slide. So we all, in addition to the 10, so we have our 10 strategy, our 5 sectors, our 10 strategies, and then we have measures. We have 25 measures. There are 6 core measures. We're calling them core measures. These 6 core measures are enough to achieve the 2030 and 2035 targets of the CAP. They're the most effective measures. So we've highlighted these on this slide. This is just a taste of some of the detail that's in the CAP. But I wanted to show what these measures actually assume. What are their performance goals, and what the modeling assumes for future GHG reduction. So I won't read this slide, but some of the takeaways here are increasing basically the vehicle fleet to be zero emission vehicles is a very effective measure. And the targets there are to essentially electrify the light duty fleet by certain percentages into the future. We also have procuring zero carbon electricity. So this is grid powered electricity provided by CPA or SCE. And the participation goals are listed on the slide. And then we have some other measures, transitioning existing buildings to all electric, accelerating freight decarbonization, which is our medium and heavy duty vehicle measure. And then we have some waste measures as well. These ones are focused on landfill disposal reduction, diversion rates, and additional organic disposal, reducing organic disposal in landfills. Next slide.
Thanks, Brian. We've got a couple of more questions that have come in, and so let's take those before I get into the details of the core measures. The first question is about decarbonizing the energy supply. How does the county do that without phasing out the 2 coastal once through cooled natural gas peakers on either side of the San Gabriel River before the Olympics? And so I'll start with that one. So how does the county decarbonize the energy supply without phasing out the 2 coastal once through cooled natural gas peakers?
Yeah, well, that is a component. So basically the CPA and SCE have carbon neutral offerings in their grid supply, and you can actually sign up for those. And the county is transitioning enrollment of all customers into those zero carbon accounts. The whole county as a whole, including all 88 cities, there's still a portion of that electricity that will be non-renewable, and it will take time to phase out all of that non-renewable electricity. SCE and CPA have plans to meet that with renewable energy through, or non-carbon sources of energy like hydropower, solar, wind, and other sources. I think long-term wise, phasing out peaker plants is probably going to be needed, and I'm pretty sure SCE is planning on doing that. If their goal is to reduce their carbon supply substantially by 2040 and beyond, those plants are going to have to be phased out. The state also has requirements under SB 100 to achieve zero carbon electricity statewide by 2045. So all the utilities are sort of aiming toward the same requirements.
The next question we have is, how do you separate GHG measurement from cities when evaluating success of measures and strategies for reduction?
Yeah, it's a good question. We look at, there's modeling and assumptions involved, of course. We're basically aggregating electricity account data from the utilities for all accounts that are located in unincorporated areas. So we're trying to isolate just those locations. For transportation, we're relying on models. SCAG is the regional MPO, and they have a region-wide model, which accounts for all travel within the entire SCAG region, and that's not just LA County, it's other counties. And so there is a modeling exercise involved in trying to parse out transportation just associated with unincorporated areas. But of course, the transportation network is highly synergistic and linked. So, you know, there's limitations in the modeling there. And I guess I would say for measurement, for measuring success though, each of the measures has specific performance goals and tracking metrics, as well as the actions supporting those measures. And the county will be measuring success based on those metrics in the future. There's a general plan reporting process, which will be conducted annually. Because the CAP is part of the general plan, there will be annual reports released. And each department, the departments responsible for implementing each measure and action, will be tracking each measure and action based on those tracking metrics to the extent the data can be collected and reported back on.
And we do have a couple more questions, but I'm going to let you, Brian, kind of wrap up
the
discussion on the core measures and the rest of the strategies and
actions. These are great questions. Please bring your questions to the breakout group and to the discussion at the end. We want to make sure we answer your questions. And we are tracking these. We will save your questions too, so they won't get lost when the Zoom's over. Okay, so just quickly, I'll try to catch up a little bit here. Core measures. These 6 core measures represent almost 90% of total emission reductions in the CAP, and you can see that visually in this chart. Next slide. Here's a list of the 25 measures as they fall within each of our 10 strategies. I'm not going to read each of these. You can read them as I continue to talk, but basically under energy supply, we're looking at phasing out oil and gas. We're looking at zero carbon electricity and renewables, energy resilience, and solar and battery distributed generation. For transit, increasing density near high quality transit areas, which is all based on the county's housing element update. A single occupancy vehicle trip reduction. This is primarily due to expanding bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, broadening transit access and transit routes, and removing parking. Next slide. Strategies 4 through 7. Low carbon transportation has a focus on electrifying the vehicle fleet, both light duties vehicles and medium and heavy duty, as well as the county's own fleet of vehicles. Decarbonization of buildings focuses on both new all-electric development and electrifying existing development, which is, you know, a big strategy of the CAP. It's very difficult to do, of course, but we're trying to do as much as we can, especially for the built environment. Efficiency, building energy efficiency is always important. Conserving water has energy benefits, embodied energy to move and treat and process water. Next slide. Waste, we are looking at additional waste diversion from landfills and organic diversion. Forests, conservation of forest land and urban canopy. And then finally, regenerative agriculture and expanding canopy cover and planting trees. And I do see that there's lots of questions, so thank you. We'll get to those. If we don't get to them in the presentation, we'll get to them in the breakout sessions. Next slide. Okay, so inventory and forecast, just a couple of visualizations here. So here is the time stamp there with the dashed line of 2018 GHG emissions from 2010 through 2018, and then a forecast up to 2045. The wedges represent sectors. So transportation is the dark blue, energy is the sort of light blue at the bottom. Next slide. This is the same chart with showing the adjusted BAU forecast. So BAU is now plus growth. No implementation of state, regional, local, county policies, just what happens if we continue to grow as we expect. Adjusted BAU accounts for those policies like renewables portfolio standard, Pavley vehicle standards, waste reduction, mandates from the state, and other things that will happen independent of the cap. Next slide. This adds the targets on top of the previous slide. You can see the CAP's targets there in the dashed white. And next slide. This is with the implementation of the cap. So now we have everything all together. You can see the forecast, you can see the targets and the declining emissions under the cap measures and actions. You can see that the 2030 and 2035 targets are achieved, but carbon neutrality is not achieved. And I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. It's very difficult to get there. The cap does focus on internal reductions to the county. So we're not including offsets or out of county reductions at this point. This is all reducing the county's activity and emissions associated with that activity. Okay, next slide. So just one more slide here. Timeline and next steps. Comments will be accepted through July 8th. SQL review is underway. The draft ER will be available for public review later this month. We'll be publishing the final draft cap later this year. Final cap, not final draft cap. And then the final EIR will go to the Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission either late this year or early next year. That's the overall timeline for the project. And yeah, next slide. Before I mention this, I just wanted I see there are a couple questions coming in. The Twee did respond to one. So the breakout sessions are organized, and we're talking about this right now, by your interest area, but there's no restriction. If you're in the energy supply group, you can talk about transportation, you can talk about waste. It was just sort of a way for us to organize people based on their priority interest area, but there's no reason we can't talk about everything. And there was a question I saw about distributed generation. The cap does have measures and performance goals for distributed generation. CPA grid supplied electricity is only part of the picture. We totally get that. To the extent we can use distributed generation to the maximum capacity and not build additional utility renewable energy, I think we're all on board with that, and we can get more into that in the breakout groups. So in each breakout group, there'll be a facilitator and a note taker, and the notes will be shared so we can see what's being written on the screen and as the discussion goes. We will be asking each group to have a volunteer to report out to the wider group. If someone would like to report the findings from the breakout group to the wider audience, we would love to have volunteers do that. And if not, the facilitator will do that. We'll have 30 minutes to talk within our groups.